It's time for Quickie Q&A, where I answer patron questions, common questions, and just questions that I make up. This is a question from Joe Croco, one of my patrons over there, and he had a 6-inch graft this spring. It was only growing blossoms at the end of the stick, at the end of the graft. No growth on any of the other buds. Is this a tip bearer, he asks, and the variety is mother. So yeah, mother is a tip bearer. Let me describe real quick the difference between spur bearers and tip bearers and everything in between. A spur on a spur bearing tree is a small, usually kind of gnarled, lumpy little growth that bears fruit. So let's say it'll bear fruit here this year, then it grows out a little more, it bears fruit again here the following year or some other year. Long-lived structures that bear fruit. Now on a tip bearing tree, you will get a lot or some shoots that grow out for a ways. It could be a long ways, some of them are very long. A lot of them are on the shorter side, say within averages of 10 to 2 inches or something like that. They grow out during the summer, and then sometime, usually maybe like in midsummer around now, they'll stop growing and form a big fat terminal bud that's a fruit bud, and then they grow fruit here. Now the following year, this may grow again. It may grow a couple inches, it may grow a lot, and bear fruit again here, or not. So with tip bearing trees, you kind of manage your pruning and stuff to make, some of these or keep some of these. The thing is though that these categories and the trees in between, which are called like, semi-spur or semi-tip, don't really fit that tightly into these categories. And in my experience, most trees that are listed as tip bearers, it's more like they do bear on tips, but most of them also bear on spurs. For instance, before answering this question, I went out to the orchard and looked at my mother tree. I have cut most of these shoots off and sent them out. Probably one of them was sent to Joe. There's still a lot of fruit on the tree, and almost all of it, the vast majority of it, is on spurs. Okay, so even if you find this mother listed as a tip bearer somewhere, it means that it bears on tips, but not solely. And in many cases, you just got to observe the tree variety and see how it grows. But in many cases, you can, like me, go out there, cut most of these shoots off, but the tree is still, producing pretty well just on all the spurs. That's a little bit about those, and I have a video I'll link at the end here that you can go watch where I walk around the orchard and I look at tip bearers and spur bearers and the difference. Okay, so to Joe's question, he grafted a 6-inch stick of mother onto something and it's only blooming at the end and it's not growing anywhere else, and this was in the springtime. So there's two possibilities. One is that he has a tree that already has an established root system. It's a decent sized tree, it has resources, it can get water, it can get nutrients, push them up the tree and grow fruit and lots of growth and stuff like that. And he has grafted on a 6-inch mother sign. My guess is this is the situation that he's in right here, and he's just adding a branch. The other possibility is that he has a new rootstock, which would just be a little skinny thing with a few spindly roots that is going to be a new tree. It just doesn't have a root system, go out and get a whole bunch of nutrients and water and support a lot of growth and fruit, and that he has grafted onto the end of that to grow a new tree, and it would literally be about this big right here. Now in this case, I would not let this fruit or flower at all. If you're trying to grow a new tree and you get flowers on the end and you just have a spindly little rootstock, immediately take all those flowers off. And I would only leave 2 buds on this anyway. I wouldn't leave a 6-inch side. I would just trim it down to like there's one bud for insurance and backup and 1 bud right here. Make sure nothing blooms and let it grow. In this situation, you could, think about leaving, let's make the blossoms pink here. You could think about leaving these blossoms here and even letting them fruit if your graft is strong enough. So you want to make this graft nice and tight, make a long graft that's say like 1 inch or more long, wrap it really well, even consider putting like a splint of wood here and tying that on to support the graft. You could potentially let this fruit and the tree would still drive, potentially again, drive growth. Now what'll happen a lot with tip bearers, if you just look at a tip bearer that's fruiting, like a normal established tip bearer, is that they will blossom, possibly set some fruit, and there'll be just like a couple of leaves up here, right where it's blossoming. Maybe like 3 to 5 leaves or something like that, often small ones. And then after that happens, whether it sets fruit or not, but once it's done blooming, then you'll see this shoot sneak out of here and start growing. And that may grow, long, it may grow short, it may grow a short ways and terminate in another fruiting bud. right? And then produce fruit again the following year out here. There's a lot of different things it can do, but a typical pattern you'll see is that it will set fruit on the tips, and you start to get the big growth push that happens in the late spring. Then you'll see this shoot come out of here and take off. None of that's guaranteed. So he's saying that these buds he wasn't seeing any growth on yet. They might just stay dormant, especially on a tip bearer. That's probably even more likely. If you really want the growth and you're not attached to getting fruit the first year or anything, I would just pinch these off, and that should hopefully encourage the shoot to grow sooner, more, faster, etc. It may also spur these to grow. Another strategy would be to just cut this back and lose that terminal bud. And in most cases, that's going to stimulate really more than one of these to grow. Usually maybe this one will grow the longest and that one will grow quite a bit. Maybe even another one would grow. In some cases, you might let it fruit or let it flower and do its thing here. And then it'll just, like, maybe the fruit won't even set, and then it doesn't want to grow, and it'll just sit here with these couple of leaves it made, and it just won't want to grow for the rest of the season. But in most cases, if it doesn't grow the first year, it'll grow the next year. Okay, so if worst case scenario is, whether you leave the blossoms or not, it just doesn't want to grow by, say, like early summer when everything else is growing. None of these dormant buds are growing. The tip's not growing out. It's not going to make like any kind of branch structure that you want for the future. There's a couple things you could do. The first one, again, is to cut this back here to right above a bud and see if that stimulates growth. In addition to that, or instead of that, you can notch the bark right here about 1/3 of the way around the tree, through the bark and slightly into the wood, and often that will either kickstart it to grow at all or make it grow more. Another thing, if there's a lot of growth around here right near, so you have other established branches and spurs and stuff like this all around this graft, typically you want to isolate that a little bit. So, pretend this isn't an actual tree, but this is just like a branch or something, so that the tree's like, oh, like all these growing points that I'm used to growing are gone. What am I going to grow? Well, it puts it into here, and then your shoot just takes off. So you can click on this here to watch the video on tip and spur bearing trees where I walk around and kind of look at the difference and talk about how they're pruned.